other reasons, we know that students are likely to have areas where their learning isn't finished. The teacher can create bridges from the previous grade level content to the new content through a systematic approach to instruction. So today we're going to discuss some strategies and resources that can support you in creating these structures. So recently, TNTP released a report titled Accelerate, Don't Remediate, New Evidence from Elementary Math Classrooms. This report provides strong evidence that learning acceleration, not the traditional approach to remediation, should be the foundation of school systems plans to help students recover unfinished learning from the pandemic. Just like in our prior example, the fourth grade teacher will start with fourth grade content and strategically build in key third grade concepts where students might need them in order to master the grade level work. This just-in-time teaching ensures that students spend more time on the work of their grade, which is key to ultimately catching up. So as you move forward in planning for this next year of instruction, you're going to need to be thinking about what resources you might use to help you. One of those resources provided by the Virginia Department of Education is the tracking logs. Kristin, can you go to the next screen? Thank you. So when you're beginning, well, for those of you, first of all, who may not be familiar with the tracking logs were created for grades K through Algebra 2 and were initially provided in the spring of 2020 during that extended school closure. They've been updated since to assist teachers in identifying which standards students have had sufficient exposure in and experience during the school year, as well as those they might not have had as much instruction in. So this is really a tool for this. So for the third grade teacher, for instance, to share with the fourth grade team, helping to give them a sense of which of the standards were given lots of emphasis and which maybe weren't given as much emphasis. And that will help that teacher, that fourth grade teacher, in planning for this next school year. So we'd like to get a feel for who in our audience has had experience utilizing the tracking logs. And so in the chat, if you have utilized the tracking logs, or maybe your division took the tracking logs and made a division specific one, which is great. We've seen some examples of that. But we'd like for you to put in the chat some of the ways that you have utilized the tracking logs. So we have a fair amount of folks who are new to the tracking logs. So you will notice that I put a link in the chat to where you can go and download a tracking log. So if you take a moment and just do that, that would be super. Some of you have talked about how your teams have shared them and you've been utilizing them to help in terms of identifying what students might need more of in this next year. Some have used them in reading and maybe some haven't used them yet at all. So I'd like for you to take a moment and download, if you click on the link, the tracking log link, and pick your grade level or one of the grade levels that you work with, because I know that some of our special ed teachers work with several grade levels. So if you would just download one of those for just a moment, take a look at the components. They're pretty basic that, they're listing the grade level standards, and then the teacher would at the end of the year identify which standards they felt were fully addressed or sufficiently addressed, and then maybe those that students might need additional experiences in this next year. In other words, they haven't had as much opportunity to learn that content. So it's extremely helpful and helping you as you initially plan. You still will want to utilize formative assessment tools to help you think about where students' gaps are, if you will. So if you take a look at that, so if your school has not utilized something like a tracking log or something similar, it really will be helpful to next year's teacher to get a sense of where kids are. So now that you know where those are and you have that link, you'll be able to utilize them this summer, or you can go back and share them with your the grade levels below you, and ask would they mind just doing a quick which standards they feel kids had great exposure with and which ones did they not. So go ahead and use that as you see fit. At this time, we talked just briefly about the need to use formative assessments and that idea of just in case versus just on time instruction. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristin.
Deb, we did have a question in the chat if we had these available for reading. And
go ahead.
I was going to say, I believe we do, don't we? The English did tracking logs as well?
I believe they did. And while Kristin's talking, I'll try to find that on the website and put the link in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to spend a little time talking about what the difference is between just in case and versus just in time instruction. So Deb alluded to this just a few minutes ago when she was talking about the TNTP report and what their recommendations are in terms of addressing unfinished learning. And one of their recommendations is to do this just in time instruction. So what does that really mean? So some of you may be familiar with, they called it the R-Cube document. It was Recover, Redesign, and Restart 2020. And this was a document that was created by the Virginia Department of Education at the end of the last school year after the March school closures to help divisions think about planning for the 2020-21 school year. And one of the really important points that was really highlighted in this document was the whole idea of just in case versus just in time. So one of the statements that was in there, it says, planning and preparing for instruction and assessment are key components of the guidance provided. Assessment should not be interpreted to mean a testing event, but rather a process of data collection that is ongoing, formative, and low or no stakes. Assessment should include just-in-time formative assessments that inform immediate instructional needs. So whatever tools that we utilize in the classroom to assess the student understanding, we know that we really don't want to look at it like a testing event, but we'd rather look at it as just-in-time formative assessments. So here's kind of a real life example to help you understand what the difference is between just in case and just in time. So for example, if the third grade teacher was preparing to teach 3.2a, which is the student will name and write fractions and mixed numbers represented by a model. Mrs. Sanchez is actually using just in case instruction. So just in case, she includes a reteaching lesson on naming and writing fractions, which is SOL 2.48. So she's not really sure, which of her students really understand the concept of naming and writing fractions, but just in case, she's going to teach a whole lesson for the whole class period on SOL 2.4a before she starts teaching SOL 3.2a. So she really basically has used an entire block to teach a lesson that some of the students may have already understood. So rather than doing what Mrs. Sanchez did, we really want to think about doing what Mr. River does instead. So he really does the whole idea of just-in-time instruction. So Mr. Rivers identifies students who have unfinished learning by implementing a quick check of content from SOL 3.4a prior to introducing the identified and named fractions and mixed numbers for SOL 3.2a. So he's used about 10 minutes of class time to identify which students need that additional reinforcement. So this whole idea of just-in-time formative assessments really support the big project that happened last summer in terms of creating the VDOE just-in-time mathematics quick checks. These were available all of last year, and we want to kind of take a pulse check to find out which of you, what your familiarity is with the just-in-time mathematics quick checks. So we're going to go ahead and administer a poll right now. So Allison, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and starting the poll. All right, so you all should see that in front of you. And we're asking you to identify to what extent were you able to utilize the VDOE just-in-time mathematics quick checks during this last school year. All right, I think we have almost everybody. Let's go ahead and stop the polling and share the results. So this really gives us a good idea of your familiarity, I can't say that word, with the just-in-time mathematics quick checks. So Deb, I think that we need to make sure we really highlight these resources, because it looks like the majority or the larger percent of people in this group haven't even heard of them or don't know what they are. So we're going to make sure that we share these with you, because you're going to be super excited to learn about them and be able to use them this year for 21-22 school year.
Kristin,
it looks like
Kristin, that is this was a perfect example of just-in-time instruction. We did a really quick pre-assessment, didn't we, of where our folks are. So now our instruction can really service the audience. So I think I just wanted to point that out. I was like, oh yeah, this is a great example.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so awesome. So we're gonna make sure that you know a lot more about these today. So before we kind of go and look at what a just-in-time mathematics quick checks looks like, we're going to just kind of talk about what they are. So these quick checks really allow teachers to help re-engage the students in that prerequisite knowledge in the context of the current grade level learning. So it really helps us to remain focused on what the learning that's happening today and not just how we're going to catch students up. And it really supports that whole idea of just-in-time instruction versus just-in-case instruction. And what they really help teachers to do is it helps us really identify those gaps and that essential learning that kids need in order to progress to that current grade level, and helps to provide that scaffolding support that may be required just in time to learn that new content. So it really helps teachers respond to student needs in real time in the context of grade level content. So what is a mathematics quick check? So once you take a look at it, you'll see that it usually includes 3 or more questions, and those questions are targeted at one particular SOL. And the questions are designed so that they can reveal those misconceptions or student errors that kids make when they're learning that content. So we're gonna take a look at one and do a deep dive into it. For those of you who have used them regularly, I think this will be a good opportunity to maybe help you listen to and get some ideas on some new ways that you can use them this year. So I think Deb put in the chat the link to, we're going to take a look at the the just-in-time quick check for 3.2a, since that's the SOL that we've been talking about. So go ahead and copy and paste that link into your browser, and it should directly upload a Word document for this quick check.
So Kristin, just while everyone is pulling that up, I think you might have pointed this out, but I just want to reiterate that regardless if you're a kindergarten teacher, a second grade teacher, a fifth grade teacher, there is a quick check for every SOL and every SOL bullet. And so as Kristin takes you through the components and you think about how you might utilize this, just recognize that there is one for every standard and every bullet. So Kristin?
All right, awesome. So hopefully you guys have had a chance to pull that up. And I'm actually going to pull one up at the same time so we can look at it together. But as you see, at the very top, it lists the SOL, and then it's hyperlinked where it says the Standard of Learning 3.2a, that's actually hyperlinked to the curriculum framework. So if you want, if you want to find out more about the essential knowledge and skills or understanding the standard, that will take you right to the curriculum framework where all those details are. Then obviously it has the SOL listed as well as that essential knowledge and skill. And then you'll notice if you click on the just-in-time quick check link, that will actually take you to the questions. And in this case, we have, let's see, we have one. You can see the questions for, it's one question, but it has several parts. And so all of these partial questions are really addressing this SOL of naming and writing fractions and mixed numbers represented by a model. Then if you click on the just-in-time quick check teacher notes, that goes down to the section where you'll see the questions displayed again. But the really cool thing about this is that the teacher notes describe what are some of those most common misconceptions that kids make or have concerning these concepts. So they not only talk about what common errors and common misconceptions you might see, but the really cool thing about it too is it gives suggestions on how you can address that with strategies and dealing with those particular and trying to help students understand those particular concepts. So a lot of people like to refer to these as one-stop shopping. So if you go back to the first page and look under the supporting resources, all of the VDOE resources that support this particular SOL are listed here. So our mathematics instructional plans are linked. If any co-teaching math instructional plans, if we have any co-teaching plans for that particular SOL, those are linked. Our word wall cards are linked. If we have any instructional videos, so any kind of resource that we have that goes along with that particular SOL is listed under the supporting resources. So a lot of teachers like to call this our one-stop shopping because you can get to so many awesome things just in one stop. And then the last section you'll see are those supporting and prerequisite SOLs. So those it lists the current grade level as well as 2 previous grade levels of any prerequisite SOLs that support that current SOL. And those are linked to those quick checks. So if you clicked on 3.2b, that would take you to quick check 3.2b. If you click on 2.4a, that will take you to quick check 2.4a. So as you can see, they're really, really awesome tools. And we're going to talk a little bit how you can actually use these in your classroom. So the really cool thing about these is they're really meant to be very flexible in how they're used. And really, you're the teacher, you're the one who's working with your students, and you know what their needs are. And they're really intended to be very flexible. So you might choose to just use one question at a time from there, or you might use some of the questions. You might use the questions with just one individual student. You might use them with small groups, or you might use them with a whole class. And really, you can use them at any point during your lesson. Some people like to use them as warm-ups, particularly if you're trying to assess some of the prerequisite skills. You could give a warm-up assessing the previous grade level SOL quick check. Really the ultimate purpose for these is formative assessment to constantly inform your instruction. Some people like to use them as exit tickets to assess the learning of the current lesson. They can be used to inform your small group instruction, with your co-teaching models and figuring out your specially designed instruction, which we talked a lot about yesterday for your small groups. This data is perfect for that and informing what you might need to do in your small group instruction for your stations or for your alternative teaching models and so forth. So that's the really cool thing about these is they are so flexible. One thing we do want to emphasize is there are some ways you should not use these. We don't ever want teachers to copy them all and make packets out of them to review for the SOL or to give for independent work or anything like that. That's totally not the purpose of these. These are for, the purpose is to inform teachers' instruction and use them formatively to assess your students' learning. So there are so many creative ways that you can use these. So for those of you who haven't ever been exposed to them, hopefully now you will be inspired to use these this year when you're planning and teaching your math lessons.
And Kristin, I'd just like to throw in there this idea that these quick checks were written by educators, Virginia educators, teachers, math specialists, and they did not create the questions on these quick checks to mimic standards of learning assessment tests. So as we've been sharing these over the past year, some folks have told us that they have been printing them and giving them to students as practice for the upcoming assessment. And just know that these do align to the standard of learning, but they're not meant to mimic assessment items on the standardized test. So just know that. But also be thinking about the ways that you can utilize just one question. You can copy and paste one question and make it a warm-up for your math lesson. Or for this 3.2b representing fractions, I might have gone back and clipped a second grade question and used it as an exit ticket the day before I began teaching that fraction lesson. So as Kristin pointed out, they are meant to be flexible, and there are virtual versions. A group of educators around the state created virtual versions, and recently we had a team of Virginia educators take and vet those, and so a few edits were made because we wanted to make sure that the virtual version aligned as closely as possible to the original version of the quick check. And those are available. We'll share that link with you at the end of the session today. We have it on a slide, and Kristin's going to be sharing, or actually you probably already know where you can find the materials for each session. So I just wanted to put out those few things. But I think you'll enjoy using those for those that are new to this. And I wondered, Kristin, would it be okay if we just took a moment and had the folks that have utilized them, could you just give us one of your best ways that you've utilized it in the chat? Could you add in the chat one of the most successful ways that you've been able to utilize the quick checks? That will be great information for your colleagues as a warm-up. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing that. Love that idea. Assessing new students, maybe you have new students and you don't know where they are in terms of a particular content before starting the unit. Some folks are using the grade level below. And keep in mind, it's okay to take pieces of this and utilize even as you're in a unit. Maybe there's another key piece of the content coming up, and you want to get a sense of where students are. So yeah, so great ideas, a lot of small group. We've also heard from teachers that they utilize these in planning with their colleagues. So they utilize look at the teacher notes, because remember what Kristin said, the teacher notes provide you with those most common misconceptions and errors that students make. And so having that conversation on their team about those common misconceptions and how they're going to be instructing and sharing those ideas has been very helpful for folks. So great ideas. Okay, so as we move forward now, we want to talk more about this idea of bridging. So Kristin has shared a lot about the just-in-time quick checks and how you can utilize those in order to gain information about students' level of understanding. But how do we now take this idea of students' unfinished learning and connect it to the new learning that students need in their current grade level? So we're going to really focus on the idea of bridging that unfinished learning to new learning. Kristin, we can move forward. Kristin mentioned a little earlier the information about the Virginia Learns document, which was released in April. We have the link here for you, but just know that if you haven't looked at this guidance, it does provide recommendations and shares resources and best practices that are related to equity curricula, especially in the areas of language arts and mathematics. It talks about remediation and intervention strategies, as well as assessments, data analysis, staff wellness, etc., those types of things. So I'll share a few slides focused on this. So the Navigating Virginia Education in Uncertain Times is a resource that built upon the one that Kristin talked about. Remember, she talked about the R squared, the Recover, Redesign, and Restart 2020 work. So this Virginia Learns document builds upon that. Okay, so within that document, there are sort of 6 areas. There's the data dashboard, the equity dashboard, the checkpoints. There is a language arts section, a math section, and technology section. So first of all, the data dashboard was meant to provide information to the stakeholders who were creating this. So this Virginia Learns document was not just created by the Department of Education. There were many, many stakeholders from the business world, the community, from institutes of higher ed. So that data was shared, data shared around student performance up to that point. Then there's the equity section and the checkpoint section. Both of those have resources and checklists that divisions and schools can utilize to sort of see where they are and where they might go in different areas. So the general checkpoints, there's one for instruction, there's one for curriculum, those kinds of things. And then, as Kristin had shared on the screen, there's the language arts resources that have been shared, the mathematics resources, and then the technology navigation systems check. That last one is really just for your tech folks to make sure that the technology pieces of your work are working. But we're going to focus on that middle column, that bridging math piece. Excuse me. The mathematics bridging standards documents that are found in the Virginia Learns materials are available and are meant to allow for the identification of content that can be connected when planning instruction and promoting deeper student learning. So they can be utilized, as we talked about earlier, in conjunction with the tracking logs, really to help link the content from one grade level to the next and to assist in planning for the next school year. The documents serve as a useful tool in long-term planning in that it can provide a resource that as teachers are considering scope and sequence. But it also can be utilized as a short-term planning resource when you're thinking about and using formative assessment to gauge students' unfinished learning. So you notice on the screen there are these trucks, and each truck has a particular grade level. So when you go to the resource, then you're clicking on the truck that, or the grade level, if you will, that's appropriate for what you are looking for. So in a few moments, we'll take a look at an example. But in the meantime, what exactly are bridging standards? Bridging standards are standards that meet one or more of the following criteria. They function as a bridge to which other content within the grade level is connected, either horizontally or vertically. They serve as a prerequisite knowledge for content to be addressed in future grades. Or they possess an endurance beyond a single unit of instruction within a grade level or course. So Kristin's going to help us to dive a little deeper into a bridging document. Kristin?
All right, thanks, Deb. So I put the link that takes you to the page that tells us all the trucks, and then you can click on grade 3 to get to the grade 3 one, but I will also put the link directly to the grade 3 so that we can all kind of take a look at the same grade level. Just for
done, Kristin.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I always forget I have somebody helping me, and I try to do things and I realize you can do it for me. So go ahead and open the grade 3 bridging document up, and we're going to kind of take a look at it together. So I'll just give you a second to get it open up. So once you open it, you can see that at the very top, it describes what bridging standards are, which is what Deb just went over with you. But I'm going to kind of go through how you can find what kind of information you can get from the chart. So if you look at the center column where it says grade 3, so obviously we're looking at the grade 3 bridging document, and the center column has the grade 3 standards. So all of the grade 3 standards are in the center column, and you'll notice that some of them are bolded. So the standards that are bolded are considered bridging standards. Okay, so the standards that meet those qualifications that Deb talked about, those standards are in bold. And you'll also notice that they are linked to the just-in-time mathematics quick checks. So what we just looked at in terms of what just-in-time mathematics quick checks are, all of these individual SOLs are linked to that particular just-in-time quick check. And then when you look at the 2 columns to the left of grade 3, those are your prerequisite skills. So we have your prerequisite knowledge skills for grade 2, as well as the prerequisite knowledge for grade 1. So on all of the bridging documents, they provide the previous 2 grade levels in terms of prerequisite knowledge. So thinking about that whole vertical alignment, when we're looking at 3.1a, you can see that prerequisite skills leading up to 3.1a are 2.1a and b, and then 1.5a and b, and 1.2a. So you can see that those are also linked to those just-in-time quick checks. When you look at the very first column, those are the content focus areas. So the SOLs are organized into content focuses. So you can see that there's different titles for each content focus areas, and they also have different colors. So using the place value to compare and order numbers, that's kind of like a turquoisey green color. The solving addition and subtraction problems with whole numbers, that's red. So as you take a look throughout the document, you can see that each content focus area is a different color. And the reason that it's a different color is because that helps us look at, if you look to the right of the grade 3 SOLs where it says possible grade 3 connections across content focus areas, that kind of gives you they're not all the connections, but there's possible cross content connections. So it really helps you kind of be very strategic, because we have to be as strategic as possible this year, even more so than ever, to try to kind of get the most bang for our buck. So these cross content connections kind of help you, give you ideas of where you can connect concepts across different contents. So for example, if you're working on, let's say you're doing 3.3a with estimating and determining sums or differences of two whole numbers, you can pair that with rounding whole numbers, which is part of the using place value content focus. So, you can make a lot of intentional connections as you're planning your instruction throughout the year. And again, these aren't all of the connections, but there's some good ideas on where you can possibly make connections across different contents. So that whole idea of, making the connections, but also really getting the most bang for your buck. And then the last column you'll see has possible future grade level and course content connections. So again, it's not all of the possible future connections, but they're possible connections. So you can kind of see that whole vertical articulation piece where, where is this leading to? What content in the future is this current content going to support? So that is pretty much how you all the information that you can get from the bridging documents. And I'm going to kind of go through an example of how you might how you might use them. We saw so many great ideas on the slideshow that we just thought that it would be more effective to have you guys do the gallery walk and look at each other's ideas. So hopefully you had a chance to do that. I just wanted to ask one group to share, and they have already been told. I already asked them if they would share, so they know. So group 14, could you share some of your ideas you had in terms of the questions?
Yes. So as far as other strategies that you and your colleagues could use to address unfinished learning, we thought it might be a good idea to use them as quick checks, and then that would guide us in keeping IEP data collection, and then we could write goals based on what data we got, so they were appropriate for that student. We also thought quick checks would be appropriate to help with grouping students for instruction, and vertical planning with previous grade to see where students left off and which standards did not get as much instructional time.
Awesome. I really love the whole idea of, these are awesome resources to help with progress monitoring and informing your IEP goals and adjusting them as necessary, and also informing your small group instruction. So I'm glad that you guys thought of that, and that's why I wanted you to share it with everybody, because I think that's, especially because we're all here as co-teachers and trying to make sure we meet the needs of our students with disabilities. So I'm just going to go over a brief example of how you could use the bridging documents. So let's say, for example, you're a fourth grade teacher and you are getting ready to teach 4.2b, which is representing equivalent fractions. So you can tell on this document, because 4.2b is highlighted, that's considered a bridging standard. So that standard really is important in terms of bridging to the next grade level content. When you go to look back and see, okay, well, what are some prerequisite skills that students should be coming in with in third grade? And this lists the prerequisite skills in 3.2a through 2b and 3.2c. So going to third grade, and you're looking at 3.2b, which is one of the prerequisite skills, And that prerequisite skill is representing fractions and mixed numbers with models and symbols. So that makes sense that kids need to be able to represent fractions with models and symbols in order to progress to that 4th grade level skill of representing equivalent fractions. And you can tell looking at this bridging document that this standard is also in bold, which means it's a really important bridging standard to 4th grade. And that really makes sense, doesn't it? Kids need to know how to represent model fractions before they can find equivalency. So this should really help you determine that, you know what, I want to make sure that my students are solid in representing fractions and mixed numbers with models and symbols. So this might prompt me to do some formative assessments and pre-assessments to see where my students are in representing fractions and mixed numbers with models and symbols. Maybe that I got the tracking log from the 3rd grade teacher, and the 3rd grade teacher made a note, you know what, we didn't really cover 3.2b as much as we should have. That would tell me right there, I really need to make sure that I fold that into that current 4th grade learning. Or I might do a pre-assessment on 3.2b and learn that, you know, a lot of my students are able to represent fractions and mixed numbers with models and symbols, but I do have a small group that I need to make sure that I work with them to understand that modeling part. So this is really how you can use, this is one of the ways you can use these bridging documents to really help you in your planning. And again, the nice thing about these documents is that they're all linked to the quick checks. So there's just kind of a whole nother one-stop shopping where you can just quickly get to the quick checks so you can do those formative assessments. So with this example, you know, during that grade 4 unit on fractions, that 4th grade teacher could integrate those grade 3 concepts into the concepts of representing fractions with models and integrate that into the 4th grade concept of representing equivalent fractions. So we're using that, you know, she would be grounding the unit and understanding representing fractions as a quantity and then bridging that to understanding equivalence. So the next few slides, we're going to talk about some more recommendations in terms of supporting unfinished learning. And you have access to all of these links. You can either access them through the PDF or the PowerPoint, but there's also a separate handout that's in that same folder that just has this chart with all of the links to those supporting VDOE resources. So you should have access to what I'm talking about. But you know, in terms of, we want to make sure, you know, it's the whole idea of that just-in-time instruction and trying to make sure we're providing access to that grade level learning and folding in those prerequisite skills to support that. It really supports the whole idea of, we want to make sure our students with disabilities are being provided access to the general curriculum. So this is another way to that whole idea of accessing the general curriculum, accessing the grade level curriculum. So, you know, rather than just, you know, blindly adhering to the pacing calendar and, you know, checking off each thing as you go, you want to really make sure you're using formative data to help gauge your student understanding and to inform your pacing. So on that right-hand column has links to supporting VDOE resources. So obviously the just-in-time mathematics quick checks are very supportive of using formative data. But also, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at our algebra readiness formative assessment items. Now we don't have these all the way starting in kindergarten, but if you're an upper elementary grade level teacher, those formative assessment items, some of them start as early as grade 3. So those are some other formative assessment items that you could take a look at. Again, instead of, you know, trying to review and stop everything you're teaching and reteach or teach all the stuff you think they don't know before you actually start the grade level, you want to do that just-in-time support within each unit. And again, our just-in-time mathematics quick checks are very supportive of that recommendation. If it would probably be impossible to try to address every single student gap. So that's really where you want to think about prioritizing. What are those most essential prerequisite skills that kids need in order to understand that current and upcoming content. And those bridging documents are very, very supportive of that goal. And you're looking to see which of those standards are highlighted and considered bridging standards will help you prioritize the most essential skills. Sometimes we make the mistake of going too far back. You want to go back just enough, kind of that whole Goldilocks idea. You want to go back just enough to provide that access to the grade level material. And again, our mathematics quick checks are very supportive of that. And another tool, if you haven't had a chance to check out, which I highly recommend, is our mathematics vertical articulation tool, abbreviated MVAT. And it actually goes from kindergarten all the way through Algebra 2, and it maps out the vertical articulation of skills from grade to grade. It's really, really important that you have a good understanding of not just your current, not just the grade level you teach in terms of the math content, but it's really important that you have a good foundation of what comes before your grade level and what comes after. And for that whole vertical articulation piece. And another supportive document is the bridging documents, because our bridging documents provide the prerequisite skills for the 2 grade levels before. We don't want to teach kids with the strategies that haven't worked. And that's actually, I mean, we talked a lot about this yesterday when we talked about specially designed instruction. You want to use strategy. If the strategy in the regular classroom didn't work the first time, why, don't do it again. You want to try something different. You want kids to be able to re-engage in that learning. So you might want to try one of our mathematics instructional plans that might approach the concept differently, or our co-teaching instructional plans. If you haven't had a chance to check out those are amazing. We have lesson plans for a variety of SOLs throughout each grade level, and they highlight the co-teaching models, what each teacher does. It provides, they provide ideas for specially designed instruction. They provide ideas for accommodations. They provide ideas for modifications. So those are great resources. And then rich mathematical tasks. That's another wealth of resources. If you haven't had an opportunity to check out, please do. The rich mathematical tasks are really, a lot of them are those high ceiling, low floor tasks that provide those multiple entry points for the learners. So just think about, different ways to re-engage the students in learning. And then this is another really important idea. Too often, what kids are experiencing in their remediation or their intervention programs is totally disconnected from what they're doing in their content class. We want to make sure that whatever intervention they're experiencing, whether it's in their core class or if it's at a different time, that it's connected to what they are learning at that moment in their class. If they're learning how to do add and subtract fractions because they don't know how to do that yet, but in their class they're learning something totally that doesn't have anything to do with adding and subtracting fractions, that's so disconnected. We want to make sure that the intervention supports what's going on in the classroom. Our algebra readiness initiative plans are some lesson plans that kind of go along with what would be taught in the regular classroom. They're actually, I think they start at grade 4, so they're the upper elementary grade levels. And then I kind of already alluded to this, you want to focus on those prerequisite skills that are relating to that content that they're learning currently. So of course our bridging documents and our tracking logs are very supportive of that recommendation. And then we always want to make sure we're considering the level of rigor. We don't want to totally focus our intervention and remediation on procedural skills that don't have any connection to what the kids are actually doing in their class. We want to make sure that we're always looking at the connection between the procedural and the conceptual. So again, referring to our mathematics curriculum framework is supportive of making sure we're looking at that rigor and also our rich mathematical tasks. Deb, I don't think we're going to have time for the second breakout activity.
No, I think you're right.
We were going to have you guys go back into your breakout rooms and kind of explore some of these resources, because I'm sure that some of them are new to you. So please take the time to check out all of these resources, because we want to, you guys have a hard enough job as it is. So use the resources that are available to you instead of having to make up your, create your own resources. If they're already there, use them. So definitely take the time to check out all these resources, especially those that you're not familiar with.
And hopefully we've intrigued you a little so that you are interested in checking out some more of these resources that you aren't familiar with or haven't been able to utilize that much during the past year. Maybe you'll be able to use them moving forward. Kristin, if you wouldn't mind, would you please put the link to the Google folder where they can access everything? That there was a question addressed to me about that. So that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
So we wanted to spend just the last few minutes sharing with you the resources, but also the links to those resources, which you'll be able to find in the PowerPoint that Kristin's going to add to that, to the bit.ly site. So you see it there, the link in the chat now, you should be able to get there. So the first one, of course, we talked a lot, or Kristin talked a lot earlier about the just-in-time quick checks, but we do want to make sure that you're aware that there are virtual formats for each of those. Most of those virtual formats, well, all of them appear in either Google Slides or Desmos. And if you've not had the opportunity to explore Desmos, especially if you're an early childhood teacher, please do that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But know that these virtual formats have been vetted by a wonderful group of educators in Virginia, and they match the quick checks that you've seen today as you've been exploring some of them. And they can be utilized either if you're teaching remotely, or maybe you're going to have students complete one or more in a computer lab if you're face-to-face, or if you have one-to-one computer. So please know that they are available. They're available at every grade. And when you go to the web page, you'll see there's an introduction. There are some professional development resources. There were some webinars. Gosh, it's been, I guess, a year or more now, but the webinars were recorded and are there for you if you would like to get a more in-depth training, if you will, around those. So the next resource we wanted to be sure that you were aware of is the Desmos activity log. This has been out for a while now. However, we've been working with teachers over the last 6 to 8 months to add additional activities for each grade level. And there especially has been a tremendous amount of new activities added for K2. And we anticipate that that will come out sometime in August. We're currently vetting those activities now to make sure that everything matches the standards. But please do check that out. There are activities available now on that log, but know that it will be updated and additional activities will be included. So I think you'll be excited about those new activities. We are extremely excited about a new project that's underway. It's called Bridging for Mathematics Understanding. And we are working with George Mason University's Dr. Suh and Dr. Wills. You may know of them. And there's two parts to this particular project. The first part is focused on modules for formative assessment and instruction that addresses grade 1 and 2 bridging standards. So we have a cadre of early childhood teachers working with George Mason to develop these materials. They'll include formative assessment items that are intended to serve as it can be served as an option, used as an optional screener in the fall, should you choose to. Each of the modules are going to include formative assessment items or groups of items that identify just those bridging standards that we talked about earlier. They also will include instructional guidance and 2 to 4 student-centered bridging activities that target the unfinished learning identified in the assessment itself. So the design of each of the modules is based on the bridging standards, on a developmental progression of the content, and contains key formative assessment items linked to instructional activities. The second piece of this, you see here listed, is bridging activities for elementary and middle school. So it's going to be bridging activities from grade 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and so on. And so these will reference the quick checks, just as you've noticed almost everything that we've put out recently references the quick checks, but they will also include instructional guidance focused on scaffolding suggestions that address student misconceptions. They'll contain 2 to 4 student-centered bridging activities, again, targeting the unfinished learning. And so, Kristin, if you go to the next slide, there's an example. Oh, you have, thank you. And so there's an example here of kind of what they're going to look like. So on the far right, for some reason, the standard is not there, but this, if the standard were 3.4 or 3.2b, I think it is, represent fractions with mixed numbers using models and symbols, that bridges back to 2.4b, which is representing fractional parts with models and with symbols. You can see how it builds in 3rd grade to where students are working more with mixed numbers. Well, the bridging documents, the bridging resources rather, that are being created, the modules that are being created in conjunction with GMU and a large cadre of teachers, will take and bridge those activities, providing classroom routines, games, rich tasks, and additional resource links that will really serve, again, as an additional resource, a place where you can pull materials that you know are very closely aligned to, not only very closely, that are aligned to the Virginia standards, so that you don't have to do that vetting process when you're looking at these. You're going to be able to use them directly, but they're going to bridge back to that prior understanding. So this kind of wraps up our session for today. And we would ask that you spend just a moment reflecting on something from the session today that might help you. And we ask that you respond to the question on the screen. What is your next step in planning to address students' unfinished learning? What's the next thing? Is it something that you want to explore? Are there conversations that you need to have? Is there work that you need to do? What would be your next step in planning to address students' unfinished learning? Go ahead and put an idea in the chat box. Great ideas. Becoming more familiar with some of the resources, talking to last year's teachers around the tracking tool. Exploring the bridging tool and how you might utilize that. Printing out some of the things that we've shared today. Great ideas, communicating with your previous grade level teachers, sharing the resources with your co-teacher. Great idea, Melanie. I'm glad you brought that up. With your other colleagues, I'm sure that not all of your colleagues are here today, so feel free to share this information with them. We would
please pass the word on. Yeah, spread the wealth.
Great step. Great job. Thank you, Alyssa, for sharing. Kristin, you want to bring it home?
Yeah. Thank you all so much for participating in this first session. If you ever have any questions, you always can feel free to reach out to either one of us. We are going to take a 30-minute break, and we'll be back here at 10:30, and you will have the opportunity to learn. I know a lot of you were excited to learn about specially designed instruction for reading strategies. So that's what you get to hear next with Kim Balsam Brown. So if you just want to